When I set off to cycle to Bosnia and beyond on a 4,000-mile bikepacking touring trip around Europe, I made a couple of changes to the setup on the Sonda Camino gravel bike. And one of those changes was a front handlebar rack made by Topeak. I just want to say that the decision to use this rack was a bit of a last minute one and not one I actually particularly wanted to make. The Ortlieb roll top handlebar bag that I normally use is still going strong. But just before I set off, I gave the bike fresh gear cables and brake hoses and all that good stuff. When doing this, I somehow managed to cut the cables just a tiny bit too short to clear the bar bag and the tent pole. And with the narrow bars, the Ortlieb handlebar bag just no longer fit correctly. I could, of course, have redone all the cables, but I couldn't really bothered and I didn't have too long to go. And I had considered using a front rack on this bike before. I have used front racks on my bikes in the past, and especially on long trips like I was about to set off on, they can be really nice for added versatility and carrying capacity. So it seemed like a good little opportunity to have a look at what was around. The Sonda forks, while they do have mudguard mounts, do not have proper rack mounts. Most racks require the fork crown hole, and the very few that don't use through axle mounts and fork bosses. But these were limited and very expensive. The rack didn't need to hold too much, just my tent really, so a heavy duty rack was not essential, just something that could clean up the front end and fit in front of all the cables. The Topeak handlebar rack looked like it could fill that spot. Made by Topeak, the rack retails for around the £50 mark. I paid about £45 of my own money. This is not a sponsored video or anything like that. I can say what the hell I like. The rack is rated for 4.5 kilograms and clamps onto multiple handlebar sizes, including 25.4mm, 28.6 and 31.8mm, using spacers to accommodate these different sizes. Once you have attached the clamps to the handlebar and got it into the position you are happy with, there is this Velcro strap that is threaded through the rack inserts and under the stem. This is to stop the rack rotating when weight is added. I will talk about how effective this is later, but it is a very easy and quick process to install. The rack also comes with a bungee cord. The rack weighs about 320 grams plus another 50 grams for the bungee cord. So all in all, a fairly lightweight rack. If you have followed along on my journey around Europe, then you will probably know where this is going, but I want to go over the good and the bad for this rack. Let's start on a positive note. The rack itself, being small and compact, is really useful for added utility, not so much for bike packing. If you're looking for a small, easy to install rack, especially if you don't have lots of mounting points on your bike, this ticks that box. The rack itself has a good shaped platform for carrying things, and strapping them down with lots of tie points makes this really easily done. Why I say this rack isn't good for bike packing though, ignoring the elephant in the room that my rack here is in half, is because these clamp-on handlebar racks always rely on what Topeak call an anti-droop strap. This is to stop the rack rotating. While this strap doesn't completely fail in doing this, it is just Velcro at the end of the day. And as you ride over bumpy ground and through wet weather, the Velcro slowly starts to stop holding, requiring you to retighten it from time to time. With my time using this rack, it would seem to droop to a certain point and then just be fine. But it did mean I had to accept the rack tilted a little further forward than I would preferred. I do think this could probably be fixed by yourself by using some small rope and tying it off instead of relying on Velcro. If you are just running errands around town, then the Velcro will probably do good enough of a job. But when bike packing on rougher terrain, this will very likely become a problem. The next thing that for me was a problem, and depending on how you use this rack might be a problem for you too, is the back plate. The rack back plate has two positions to increase or decrease the height of the rack, above the front wheel. Yet whichever position you have it in, the backplate sits higher than the bars. This is partly to make it easier to strap things down and use that bungee cord, but it does make it harder to mount things like an out front Garmin mount. Practically impossible really. In fact, using a handlebar mounted rack limits what you can attach to the bars, as it takes most of the stem clamping area. Different bars may have more space, however most bars taper to a narrower diameter. I guess it's time to address that elephant in the room though. And that is that this rack, after close to 1,800 miles, decided to snap just one day before I arrived at my first destination of Sarajevo in Bosnia. How it managed to break, I'm still not entirely sure. The rack was not overloaded past that 4.5 kilograms total capacity, and the day it broke, I hadn't been riding over anything extremely rough. It was definitely disappointing and frustrating at the time, and this is the main reason I say I wouldn't recommend using this off-road or while bikepacking. It's just not a strong enough rack. Even though it is kind of marketed as such, this rack is better suited to just day-to-day running errands, carrying small things from time to time, rather than day in, day out use. I unfortunately wasn't able to return this rack to Topeak to find out if it was a manufacturing defect or something else, as they would have needed both parts of the rack back, and sending it back from Bosnia would have cost way too much, more than the rack cost itself. And as I cycled all the way back from Serbia in the end as well, I wasn't going to be carrying the broken part all the way home. So my conclusion with this rack is that for the price, it's a neat idea, but not quite good enough for what it is designed for, unfortunately. There are other options out there for handlebar racks, and while I do like the design of this one the most, with it being so easy to strap everything to, it is unfortunately just not strong enough. It almost just needs a support from the fork bolts back to the rack, and it would probably work great. Would I buy this rack again? Well, surprisingly, I would, but only for a town bike where I might find myself needing to strap light, awkward items to it. It was nice to have this rack, especially when I stopped off for a couple of days and I just wanted to ride around, pick up some groceries and stuff like that. It worked really nicely for that. For bike packing though, the answer for me is a definite no.